Without notice. I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Last week I met with Louis and Tess, who run a cafe in Fairfield. Louis and Tess were promised that a Labor government would bring down power prices by $275 a year. But Louis and Tess are facing a 56% rise in power prices over the next 2 years and are forced to take measures like turning off the air conditioning to try and rein in surging costs. Will the Prime Minister apologise to families and businesses like the one Louis and Tess run for not delivering on his $275 commitment to cut electricity prices?
Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister will be heard in silence. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. We stand by the evidence, which is that renewables are the cheapest form of power. And the best way to get power prices down
on my left.
is to get renewables up. And that's exactly what this budget has done. Nearly $24 billion for clean energy, investing in Marinus Link, renewable energy zones, offshore wind, pumped hydro, community batteries, solar BECCS, all of it making up for a decade of neglect, a decade of denial, a decade of chaos. We had on those opposites watch 4 gigawatts leave the system and 1 gigawatt come in. That's what occurred from those opposite. Now, common sense tells you that with demand and supply, if you have less supply but demand is going up, then you will have pressure when it comes to prices. But, of course, those opposite were too busy fighting for power amongst themselves to worry about generating power for the country. That's essentially the problem that occurred.
The Leader of the Nationals.
That's essentially the problem that occurred. They had a rotation of ministers. They had every time that we had the potential of an energy policy being adopted, even ones that could have been adopted with bipartisan support, instead of adopting them, they just rolled the leader. That's what occurred. Order. They were too busy worried about their own power squabbles.
Will pause. The Manager of Opposition Business on a point of order.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, I ask that you follow in the tradition of Speaker Jenkins and direct the Prime Minister to relate his material to the question at hand, not some kind of historical excursion. He's looking for every reason to avoid answering a clear and direct question.
You may resume your seat. The Leader of the House.
To the point of order, Mr Speaker, this was hardly a tight question. It went for the full 30 seconds available and asked what the impacts were on a cafe in Fairfield of electricity prices. Now, the Prime Minister is going to exactly why there's pressure on those families and those households and their businesses right now.
Order. The Prime Minister is in order. The question was about power prices and the question was about commitments about those prices. I'm listening carefully to the Prime Minister and I give him the call.
Yes, Mr Speaker. Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Of course, what we know is that there are two big reasons why there are pressure on prices at the moment. One of which is, I've outlined already, is the failure of those opposite to actually build enough supply to generate power in the country because they were too busy worried about power struggles within themselves. But the second, of course, is, and this might be a news release for those opposite, the fact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine has led to global power prices rises that has occurred throughout the entire world. It seems oblivious to those opposite that this has occurred, but it is just a fact.
The member for Deakin will cease interjecting. Order. When the House comes to order, the member for Aston and the member for Herbert will cease interjecting so we can hear the member for Robertson and give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Aged Care. On Friday, the Fair Work Commission awarded a 15% pay rise for aged care workers. How does this put security, dignity and humanity back into the aged care system for workers and older Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Aged Care and the Minister for Sport.
I thank the member for Robertson for his question and acknowledge his service as an emergency department doctor over the years. He knows very well the importance of our election commitments like 24/7 nurses back into residential aged care to take the pressure off our acute care system and the people like him in emergency departments across the country. I am confident that aged care workers like Aditi and Tiana at Orem Terrigal are grateful that he is there fighting in their corner. And fighting we are, because after only 5 months in office, we have now addressed 37 recommendations of the Royal Commission into aged care, 37 of 148, compared with only 9 of 148 that were addressed by the previous government in 15 long months, where aged care workers were crying out for assistance. And now, on Friday, aged care workers have this result, and I want to thank those workers for bearing with us and all of the people that supported them, the families, the sector, the people in this place who have fought for a pay rise for aged care workers for so very long. It is hugely welcomed. It is desperately needed, because a key part of the Albanese government's commitment to fixing the crisis in aged care is our steadfast support for the skilled and dedicated aged care workforce who stand among our frontline pandemic heroes. And I'd specifically like to recognise our home care workers who will receive this 15% interim pay rise, who drive from home to home, often unpaid, trying to support and prioritise huge client loads. These workers play such an important part in helping people maintain their dignity and their independence as they want to age at home. And so prior to the election, we promised to support a meaningful pay rise for them and for people in residential aged care. And within weeks of being sworn into government, we delivered on that promise. And now, just 5 months into government, we have this decision, a meaningful pay rise and a very important first step. We welcome the Fair Works interim decision to increase wages of direct care workers in both home and residential care by 15%. Working in aged care is difficult. It is physically and emotionally demanding, and it is skilled work. And then you had COVID that made everything 10 times worse. So in May 2021, I met, and many of us on this side of the House met with Jude, whom you might remember for her fabulous pink hair, who said to us that she loves the work that you do, but love does not pay the bills. So it is for people like Jude that we have been fighting. It is for people like Jude that we will continue to fight, as this is step 1 of a 3-step process to keep this process going. I'd also acknowledge Teresa, a home care worker who many of us have seen in this place fighting for a pay rise for people like the colleagues that she wants to support. She can't afford to do the job that she loves. She can't afford to pay for the petrol to fill the tank to drive from home to home as a home care worker. This 15% interim pay rise will bring some relief to her and allow her to keep doing the job that she loves. And that is the right thing to do. It's also the smart thing to do, because we need to bring workers back into the aged care workforce. We need to fill the staff shortages after 9 years of neglect. And that'll do.
His time has expired. I'll give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer the Prime Minister to the front page of the Australian.
The Opposition will resume her
on
seat.
The 2nd of May.
She will resume her seat. Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition knows my position on props. I'm going to. The member for Longman. I'll ask the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to begin her question again, without the use of a prop.
My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer the Prime Minister to the front page of The Australian on the 2nd of May this year, titled "Life Will Be Cheaper Under Me," where the Prime Minister said, "Labor has real lasting plans for cheaper electricity and cheaper mortgages. Given the budget confirmed power prices will rise 56% and interest rates have already gone up 6 times since the election, how can the Prime Minister seriously suggest that life is cheaper under Labor? Why won't he say sorry for yet another broken promise?"
The Deputy of the Opposition will resume her seat. Order. I specifically asked the Deputy Leader of the Opposition not to use a prop. If she does that again, she'll be asked to leave the House. I can't be clearer than that. That goes for every member in the House. Nice try. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I always read the front page of The Australian, Mr Speaker, so I did read that. I read the front page of every newspaper in this country to try and keep on top of where things are. And a couple of weeks later, in May, the first interest rate increase occurred by the Reserve Bank on their watch, and I thought they were in government at that point in time. But what we also know is that there was also scheduled to be an increase in energy prices, in wholesale prices, at the same time. But I didn't get to read about that on the front page of The Australian. I didn't get to read about it. And I wonder why that is the case. Because it was scheduled to occur during the campaign, just like the interest rate increase occurred during the campaign. But we knew about one, but we didn't know about the other. We didn't know about the other. And we didn't know about the other because someone
Order.
Someone hit it.
Right.
Someone actually introduced a change in the law so that people couldn't know that there was this wholesale price scheduled to occur. And what date did they pick? What date did they pick? Because the election was on May 21. So do you think they picked a day before May 21 or after May 21? Hands up those who think they picked the day after. Hands up those who think they picked the day after. You are all right. They picked the day after because they were not transparent. They were not transparent about what they had intended, as a result of this government.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? He's concluded his answer. I give the order. When the House comes to order, I'd like to hear the member for Chisholm.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What steps has the government taken to deliver on its commitment to get wages moving again?
Great question.
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Chisholm very much for her question. And one of my favourite days of the election campaign, I was with the member for Chisholm, indeed, when I was asked if I supported a pay rise of $1 for people who are on the minimum wage. And on that day I said absolutely, absolutely. And the response of the then government was that was loose. They said it was irresponsible
on my left.
to support a pay increase for those Australian heroes of the pandemic, those people who are on the minimum wage, looking after Australians during that pandemic. And they said, no, can't have $1 increase, not $1 an hour, because that will ruin the economy. The sky will fall. A decade of low wages under those opposite being used as a deliberate design feature of economic policy. Well, we on this side of the House are getting wages moving again. And one of the first things that we did, of course, was make a submission to the Fair Work Commission saying that those people who are on the minimum wage deserve not to go backwards. And the Fair Work Commission granted an increase of 5.2%, more than the then inflation rate of 5.1.
Member for Deakin,
but on Friday there was further good news, because the Fair Work Commission granted aged care workers a 15% wage rise. A 15% wage rise. And when I was asked whether I welcome that, I said absolutely. Those opposite who presided over a growing crisis in aged care but had contempt for those workers in aged care who worked under such critical circumstances during the pandemic in particular. They are heroes of the pandemic and they deserve more than our thanks. They deserve a pay rise. And that was something that was acknowledged by the Fair Work Commission. On the weekend, on the Sunshine Coast, I met with Deb and Glenn. They told me how much this pay rise means for them. Aged care workers who go to work, who love their work, who love the people that they care for. They certainly don't do it for the money. They do it for their care. for fellow Australians. And the fact that those opposite find this somehow a contestable issue when I am praising aged care workers who look after our oldest Australians just shows the contempt that they have for old Australians who deserve dignity and respect. This week we'll have a chance with the Secure Jobs Better Pay Bill to actually take those principles even further and make sure we have an industrial relations system that works for people.
Members, time has expired. And I give the call to the member for Wentworth.
Thank you. This question is for the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister agree that real effective wage rises in low-paid industries can be achieved through the awards, as has been shown this week in the Aged Care Awards, rather than through complex IR legislation that wasn't taken to the election, brings in small business and may delay wage rises in protracted negotiations?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'll start and I'll ask the Minister to continue as well. And I thank the member for Wentworth for her question and for her constructive engagement in this House. I think it is, though, not credible to say that we did not take our policy to lift wages to the election. We were very, very clear. We were very clear that we'd make wage theft a crime. We were very clear that we wanted to lift wages. We were clear that we would make submissions to the Fair Work Commission about those on the minimum wage, about those in the aged care workforce. We were very clear that we would make secure work an objective of the Fair Work Act. We were very clear that we would make gender pay equity an objective of the Fair Work Act. And one of the things that's very clear and why we need to change the industrial relations system is that not only have real wages gone backwards over the previous decade as a deliberate policy of the then government, what we know is that the feminised industries, people like our cleaners, our early learning educators, our aged care workers, our disability care workers, have copped the brunt of the holding back of wages in this country. And that's why a fairer country deserves a fairer industrial relations system. That's what our Secure Work Better Pay Bill will do. We believe that there is a need to reform the system. That was something that we took and engaged very much with business, and we continue to do so, as well as with the unions. We did so at the Jobs and Skills Summit here. It is one of the challenges that we need to meet. The Reserve Bank Governor made it very clear that we need to lift wages, that it was something that was holding back the economy, and that's why our legislation is worthy of support by this parliament, because we believe very clearly we have a mandate for it. But I'd ask the Minister.
The call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations.
Thanks very much, and I reiterate thanking the member for Wentworth for the way in which he's been engaging with this debate and the further conversations that are still yet to happen. But I do have to note as to why we don't just rely on the award system. People on enterprise agreements earn more, and businesses with enterprise agreements get more flexibility and get more productivity. So enterprise agreements do provide a better outcome, but they are largely at the moment less available if you're a smaller business or medium-sized business, and less available if it's a feminised workforce. If we can deliver the pay rise and the productivity, it's a much better outcome.
And order. Give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. What information has the Royal Commission discovered in its first week of public hearings that would otherwise have remained secret? Who were the relevant ministers during the operation of the Robo-Debt scheme?
Give the call to the Minister for National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
Thank you, the member Lingiari, for your question. At the conclusion of the first week of public hearings of the Robo-Debt Royal Commission, Australians have learned that the previous coalition government received departmental and legal advice that the Robo-Debt scheme was unlawful from its inception. Specifically, Australians have learned, firstly, that in 2014, at the dawn of the Robodebt scheme, the then Liberal National Government received advice from their own lawyers that the scheme was likely illegal. Secondly, we've learned that the former Department of Social Services Director of Payments and Integrity, who's responsible for seeking the 2014 internal legal advice, had warned that income averaging to raise welfare debts was likely unlawful, that advice. He said he and his team were almost immediately concerned about the proposal, which he also described as unethical. The same official said that the DSS legal advice was black and white. It should have ended the proposal. Indeed, he likened the Robodebt scheme to the Dallas Buyers Club scam of speculative invoicing of unsuspecting victims. Thirdly, we've learned in 2018 top law firm Clayton Utz provided advice that the scheme was not able to be justified.
The Minister will resume his seat. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Minister for Cyber Security and the Minister for Energy. I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, there's a Royal Commission underway at the moment, and there is a well-respected principle that the House, the Parliament, not interfere in judicial processes or indeed
the Attorney General will cease interjecting.
And indeed, as practice itself notes, Royal Commission's proceedings have a quasi-judicial character. So it is an important public policy question whether the minister ought to be offering a running commentary on what is an important process that is underway right now. That is an important question, Mr Speaker, for you to determine.
Order. I'll hear from members on my right. Far too much noise. I give the call to the Leader of the House.
Yeah, thanks very much. Just to the point of order, it's been raised before, and so the Manager of the Opposition Business, I presume, knows, because he didn't keep reading page 524 of practice, which is the quote that he just read, where it acknowledges that in the ordinary event, debate is allowed on royal commissions in the House. Certainly not on jury trials, but certainly yes on royal commissions.
Order. I'm listening carefully to the Leader of the Opposition. I thank the Manager for raising that as a point. Sorry, the Minister for Government Services.
So Australians have learned three things. Firstly, the internal legal advice was this was most likely illegal. Secondly, the former Director in charge of Integrity and Payments said the scheme should have been stopped. And thirdly, top law firm Clayton Utz provided advice in 2018 that the scheme was not able to be justified. This prompted internal emails saying this was catastrophic. Clayton Utz offered to rework the advice. So, but for this Royal Commission, these three revelations that the Liberal National Government received departmental and legal advice that Robodebt was illegal from 2014 onwards would never have seen the light of day. The other part of the member for Lingard's questions is who were the relevant ministers during the operation of this unlawful scheme? They were the member for Cook, Minister for Social Services 2014-15, the former member for Pearce, Minister for Social Services 2015-2017, the member for Wannon, Minister for Human Services and Minister for Social Services, our friend the member for Bradfield, our Minister for Families and Social Services, the member for Fadden, Minister for Human Services, the member for Aston, Minister for Human Services. In conclusion, Mr Speaker, there have always been three explanations for the conduct of ministers in this operation. One, they were obeying the law and it was lawful, or two, it wasn't lawful but they just didn't know what was happening beneath their noses, so they were essentially negligent, or three, that they did know but didn't care. We've eliminated the "it was lawful, Your Honour" defence. We wait to see what the answer is to the remaining two explanations.
The member for Aston. The member for Aston is warned. Turn the camera on. Give the call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's opinion piece on the 24th of April 2022, which read, "Australia needs a government that will accept responsibility and not seek to blame others." The Prime Minister's first budget confirms electricity prices are going up by 56%, inflation will hit 8% and unemployment is set to rise.
Order.
Will the Prime Minister
member for
take
Hume will resume his
responsibility?
seat. Will resume his seat. There is far too much noise. I cannot hear where the question is directed and I can't hear the question. So I'm going to ask the member for Hume to begin again, and I want the House to remain silent to show him the courtesy that he deserves. I give the call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's opinion piece on the 24th of April 2022, which read, "Australia needs a government that will accept responsibility and not seek to blame others." The Prime Minister's first budget confirms electricity prices are going up by 56%, inflation will hit 8% and unemployment is set to rise. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for a budget with no plans to deal with these pressures?
I give the call to the Prime Minister, who will be heard in silence.
Well, Mr Speaker, they say all roads lead to Rome, but all road scholarships clearly don't lead anywhere. because the shadow treasurer.
Members on my left will remain silent.
The shadow treasurer had a moment of clarity recently. This is what he had to say about energy policy. He said this: "The development of interconnectors and transmission is critical to bringing new generation capacity into the energy system, while shoring up reliability and affordability across state borders." Pretty good statement. Pretty well done, Angus.
The member for Hume.
Then he went on to say thousands of kilometres of new transmission is likely to be needed to connect new generation. So you compare the rhetoric that they have and they had before the election, where they spoke about they were going to have all this new generation, but in fact they had 4 gigs out and only 1 gig in. They now are trying to run a scare campaign about transmission and that we should have an energy system without transmission. That completely contradicts what they said before the election. They didn't do anything about it. And they had some 22 energy policies and didn't land one. So it's no wonder that my friend the Treasurer here, and we've only got one, can't get a question from the Shadow Treasurer. Can't get a question from the Shadow Treasurer. All we get is recycled questions from the bloke who was the largest failure.
The Prime Minister will pause and order. The member for Moreton. And I give the... When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Hume on a point of order. The member for Hume.
Relevance, Mr Speaker, is a very clear question. Whether the Prime Minister will take responsibility for his failed budget.
Resume your seat. The question was broad about the Prime Minister's budget, about inflation, about prices and other aspects. And order the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, while I'm speaking and ruling on the member for Hume, I'd ask the House to remain silent. The Prime Minister is in order and I give him a call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. In the point of order, the Shadow Treasurer then finally got around to asking a question about the budget. But he did it in a point of order rather than ask the question to the Treasurer, because he's simply not up to the task of taking on the Treasurer when it comes to economic policy. Those opposite were responsible for a decade of denial, a decade of failure, 22 different policy announcements, and didn't land one. Didn't land one. Not a single one, because they were too interested in the power struggles of their internals and not worried about powering up Australia by fixing up the energy sector.
Order.
We will do it.
Prime Minister's time has concluded. And give the call to the member for Bruce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Could the Treasurer explain to the House, in 3 minutes or less, how the budget responds to the challenge of rising inflation?
I give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Bruce for asking that question with characteristic panache and class. Mr Speaker, the budget we handed down nearly 2 weeks ago was overwhelmingly influenced by the inflation challenge, and it was primarily a response to that challenge. And it had to be an inflation-focused budget because inflation is the #1 challenge facing our economy right now, just as it is for economies right around the world. And that meant that the budget had to deliver cost of living relief, and it had to invest in the drivers of the economy, and it had to start cleaning up the mess that was left to us from the wasted decade, and it had to do all of those things without adding to inflation. And that's exactly what our first budget delivered. By providing targeted cost of living relief in areas like cheaper early childhood education and cheaper medicines, by investing in the capabilities of our people and the capacity of our economy with free TAFE and more university places, with the National Reconstruction Fund and our Powering Australia plan. And most importantly of all, when it comes to this inflation challenge, keeping spending under control and finding responsible savings in the budget. And this responsible approach to the budget marks a total change from what we got from those opposite over the previous 9 years. In our budget, an average 0.3% annual real spending growth over the forward estimates, compared to an average of 2.6% a year in their budgets, and that was before the pandemic. More than 90% of tax revenue upgrades returned to the bottom line in our budget, compared to 40% by the previous government. And $22 billion of savings in our budget, but not a single cent of savings on the expenditure side in the March budget handed down by those opposite. Now, we knew we had to act differently from our predecessors. We knew we had to be more responsible, and because we did that, this budget doesn't make our inflation problem worse. In fact, if we had done what they did and spend all of the revenue upgrades that they had done that on 14 occasions, they'd spent every cent of the revenue upgrades, and that would have added another 0.5 percentage point to inflation over the next year, and interest rates would have to go even higher as a consequence. So the budget, Mr Speaker, was right and responsible. It was defined by the times and it was designed for the times, and it will help us steer us through the difficult days that are ahead of us, so that we can build an economy that does get wages moving again after a wasted decade of wage stagnation. It will deal with the aged care crisis that we inherited, the energy policy chaos that we inherited, the labour shortages that we inherited, and begin to deal with the $1 trillion of debt that those opposite left behind with almost nothing to show for it.
Give the call to the honourable member for Cowper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Heritage Hotel in Dorrigo in my electorate of Cowper has their electricity supply contract due to be renewed next year. They've been informed that the hotel's annual electricity price is set to increase by $25,000, or almost 60% in 2023. Why are businesses like the Heritage Hotel in Dorrigo having to pay for the Prime Minister's broken promise to cut power prices?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, and I thank the member for Cowper for his question. Indeed, Dorrigo's a great town. He's very privileged to represent such a great local community. You might like to tell the small business, though, that in the hidden power price increase, that small businesses in New South Wales were due to, according to the release, of course, that was the 25th of May. 25th of May, I don't think it's very hard for you to blame this side of the House on, was due to go up by 19.7%. 19.7% as a result. 19.7%.
The member for Hume will cease interjecting. The member for Hume.
And over there, when they had a Liberal Party in Western Australia, they were led once by Richard Court, the former WA Liberal Premier, and he's had something to say over the last couple of days. And I agree with his comment where he said the past decade of national energy policy has been, to quote him, a slow-moving train wreck.
And I give the call to the member for Solomon.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Workplace Relations. What will the Albanese Labor government's Secure Jobs Better Pay bill do to get wages moving after a decade where wages were kept deliberately low? And has the government considered responses to the bill?
Give the call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the member for Solomon, who shares the concern that in Australia we need to get wages moving. And I hear opposite, oh, we all do from those opposite. 10 years of wanting to make sure that they didn't move, 10 years keeping them deliberately low, and look at the different measures that we've taken already. So when we took the measure to put the submission in for the annual wage review, that was what they described as being a loose unit with the economy. That was what they described as being reckless and dangerous. That's what delivered a 5.2% increase on the minimum wage. And then they also refused to put in a submission backing aged care workers. Well, I challenge those opposite. Go to the aged care centres around your own electorates now and let them know that the 15% that's been awarded, that you're opposed to a government fighting for that. But they won't have to wait for you to do that, because already those opposite are making clear that they're opposed to legislation that will get wages moving. There is no doubt that if you're on an agreement, you get paid more than if you're on the award. New figures came out today, and the Fair Work Commission is now regularly releasing figures as to what are the pay increases that are coming if you are on a registered agreement, an average of 3.6%. Now, that's at the exact same time that wages at the moment are running at 2.6%. Now, for those opposite, we know why they opposed it. The Shadow Treasurer gave away why he opposed it in one of the most extraordinary arguments against our bill. He said it pushes up wages. Pushes up wages. That was his reason for opposing it. But it went to a new level today, and I do have to thank the Leader of the Opposition. I'm so glad when you did the reshuffle, you kept Michaelia Cash where she was. Senator Cash. Now, remember previously Senator Cash had said Labor policy would end the weekend, which we had presumed that Monday to Friday were therefore still available. Today, the bill will potentially close down Australia. Close down Australia. They've got a real sense of nuance, those opposite. Close down Australia. Well, I'll tell you what, people who are watching wages run at 2.6 while inflation's running at 7.3 and projected to reach 8% want action now. They want the parliament to act now. And when they hear those opposites saying, oh, can't we just wait another month? Can't we just wait a little bit longer? They know that they were kept waiting for 10 years while wages were deliberately kept low, and they should not be left waiting. They should not be left waiting in a situation where it becomes harder to make ends meet because the parliament has not yet acted.
Give the call to the member for Fairfax.
Mr Speaker, my question goes to the Prime Minister. The government's budget has disproven the Reputex modelling behind Labor's Powering Australia energy plan. And I note over the weekend that the Department for Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water has removed reference to that modelling from its website. Since Treasury and the department don't trust Labor's modelling, why should the Australian people?
Give a call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. The member for Fairfax was heard.
I'll get to you in a minute.
The member for
You've got to wait for
the Leader of the Nationals. The member for Fairfax was heard in question. So will the minister. I'll give him the call.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the honourable member for the question about modelling. And yes, the modelling commissioned by the Labor Party in the opposition is very important because it underlines the fact that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy, Mr Speaker. It underlines the fact that renewable energy will create jobs across our country, Mr Speaker. Now, we understand that. Any sensible economist understands that. Those opposite are still struggling with that, Mr Speaker. They're still struggling with that. They think that the cheapest form of energy is nuclear, Mr Speaker. They think the cheapest form of energy is nuclear. The Leader of the Opposition was asked the other week about nuclear energy being more expensive, and he said, no, Chris Bowen, that's an assertion by Chris Bowen. It's not supported by the facts from Europe and North America. Now, the Leader of the Opposition is on to me, Mr Speaker. He's on to me. I did call the CSIRO and Australian Energy Market Operator, the GenCost report, and asked them to write that nuclear energy is the most expensive form of energy. Then I got on to Stanford University and asked them. Then I got on to Harvard University and asked them. Then I got on to the International Energy Agency and asked them. Then I got on to the International Nuclear Report and asked them. These are all groups who say that nuclear energy is the most expensive form of energy, but it has passed by the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker.
The member for O'Connor, I'm trying to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business. I'll give him the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, you have previously asked a minister to return to a question because he's, quote, had a preamble. The minister has had a preamble. He needs to answer the question, why has the modelling been taken down from the website?
The question contained more than that one component, but I'm listening carefully to the minister and ask him to return to the question specifically regarding the modelling, and I give him the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And we're happy to talk about modelling. I look forward to the opposition releasing modelling of the impact of nuclear energy on power prices. I look forward to the opposition releasing information as to where the nuclear power plants will go. I mean, will it be in Yeppoon or in Yeppen? Where will it be, Mr Speaker? That's what we want to know. The LNP,
the LNP,
Mr Speaker, stands for Local Nuclear Power Plant, Mr Speaker.
The member for Fairfax was warned numerous times he will now leave the chamber under 94A. When the House comes to order, we will hear from the member for Tangney in silence, and I give him the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How will the government's plan for cheaper childcare benefit Australian families and the economy? Thank you.
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Tangney for his question and for his passionate advocacy of cheaper childcare to benefit his electorate. And of course we know that cheaper childcare will be good for productivity, it will be good for workforce participation as well as good for population growth. It's good for families, it takes pressure off family budgets, and it also is of course good for children, given that 90% of human brain development occurs in the first 5 years. And last week I had the opportunity with the member for McNamara of visiting the Avenue Children's Centre in Balaclava. There I met Louise Hurd with her son Jack and Laura Hill with her son Levi. And it was Halloween. The kids were all dressed up, superheroes. They were all very keen. And what they were keen on, the parents there, was the fact that they now have a government that recognises the importance of early learning. The workers there, the educators, were keen as well by the fact that they now have a government that respects the work that they do. And I then went on with the member for Boothby to Good Start Early Learning in Somerton Park. And the kids there, again, were growing their very own veggie garden, learning about food nutrition, also learning about cooperation and the skills that you learn at an early learning centre, something that parents value and certainly this government values. There, of course, I met as well Honey and Chili, the centre's little guinea pigs, where kids get to take turns taking them home because many of the kids at that childcare centre don't live in houses where they're allowed to have a permanent pet. Makes a big difference to them. And I even went to the member for Fisher's electorate at Baringa last week as well. And there, of course, we had there on the Sunshine Coast a growing community full of families who really said to me very clearly, thank you for the government's actions which will make childcare cheaper, which will be able to help Baringa's on the Sunshine Coast inner region in Queensland. The Leader of the Nationals will cease interjecting. I have to educate those opposite Queenslanders about where places are. This is a brand new centre in what is a growing new suburb of Baringa. And there, of course, I thank the children there for giving me a book. If I was Prime Minister, they wrote and illustrated themselves. And we won't be giving free ice cream or bringing back dinosaurs, but we can make childcare cheaper.
And I give the call to the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, your government wants to host the 2026 COP Climate Summit with the Pacific, yet Australia is one of the world's biggest fossil fuel exporters, with a further 114 new coal and gas projects in the pipeline. Prime Minister, to help secure the hosting of the Global Climate Summit, will you now commit to not opening any new coal and gas projects?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question and for her engagement and her passionate advocacy for action on climate change. The government will be implementing the plan that we took to the election, our Powering Australia plan, our plan to reduce emissions by 43% by 2030, our plan to engage with our Pacific neighbours. At the Pacific Island Forum, which Prime Minister Bainimarama hosted in Fiji, it was clear to me that the entry card to get into discussions around the globe is action on climate change, is taking climate change seriously. And the fact is that the communique from that summit, from the Pacific Island Forum, welcomed the Australian government's new position, welcomed it, as it's been welcomed around the world, as it's been welcomed in North America by President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau, as it's been welcomed in Europe by the European Commission, as it has been welcomed and will be welcomed at the COP, which the Minister will be attending next week on behalf of the Australian government. Australia is now back engaged with the global challenge of dealing with climate change. And we know that one nation alone can't deal with it. We need to be part of bringing the community with us, and we need to be part of bringing the whole globe with us as well, which is why I've been very pleased in the discussions I've had. In most countries, this is not a partisan issue. I discussed with the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, just last week, and the first issue that we discussed as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, a Conservative Prime Minister and an Australian Labor Prime Minister, was action on climate change and our common positions on that, just like I had that discussion with Prime Minister Johnson when he was in office, and Prime Minister Truss when she was in office as well. The extraordinary thing about when you engage with international leaders, and we will be engaging to secure the hosting of the COP in a few years' time, and we will be attempting to host that with our Pacific neighbours. We're receiving strong support from around the Pacific for that objective. It would be a good thing for Australia to do, and I look forward to success and to notifying the Parliament and for us to working to host what is a very important international event.
Give the call to the member for Bennelong.
My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How will the Albanese Labor government's plan for more affordable early childhood education and care alleviate pressure on families struggling with the cost of living?
Give the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Bennelong for his question and acknowledge his commitment to young families in the electorate of Bennelong, 9,400 of which will benefit from the legislation that we introduced to make early childhood education and care more affordable. More affordable, Mr Speaker, for 1.2 million families right across Australia, including 9,400 in Bennelong. As the member knows, access to affordable early childhood education is great for our children. As the Prime Minister mentioned in his previous answer, rightly so, mentioning that 90% of a child's brain develops before the age of 5. and it's vital. A vital part of a child's development is that access to early childhood education, good quality early childhood education. But it's also a vital part of our economy, Mr Speaker, a very important part of our economy, because it's important for parents, and particularly women who happen to be the primary caregivers most of the time, who are looking for opportunities in the workforce. But of course, even when women get those opportunities in the workforce, there are barriers to them participating, whether it's opportunities for further study, opportunities to develop their careers, or opportunities to take on more hours. There are structural barriers, and the cost of affordable early childhood education is one of those barriers. By making early childhood education more affordable, what we're actually doing is achieving substantive equality for women, something that those opposite voted against substantive equality for women, because it's not just about providing opportunity, but creating the conditions under which women can undertake and take advantage of those opportunities by being able to go back to work, by being able to take on extra study or extra hours. But, Mr Speaker, like the member for Bennelong and like the members on this side of the House, I've also met with families in my electorate of Cowan who would like to be able to go to work, would like to be able to supplement their household income, particularly at a time where we know families and households are doing it tough, and they can't do it because of the competing pressures on the family budget. What our government did, what the Albanese Labor government did within its 5 months of being elected, making early childhood education more affordable for 1.2 million families right across Australia. Not just good for children, not just good for parents, particularly women who want to take advantage of those opportunities and achieve substantive equality, but also good for household budgets, because it means that parents can go out and earn more and alleviate those cost of living pressures that we're seeing at the moment.
Give the call to the member for Casey.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, under your budget, how much will gas prices go up by?
I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question, and I note that, remember, there was a time where questions used to get asked on this side of the House by Dixers, and they spoke about the gas-led recovery. The gas-led recovery.
Then they put Angus in charge.
And they spoke about how they actually appointed Andrew Liveris, who I'll be meeting with this afternoon, actually, Mr Liveris. He's a quality person. He's someone who's been put in charge of...
Prime Minister...
Seriously.
Will pause. The Prime Minister has been answering the question for 30 seconds, so I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition out of courtesy.
Well, on relevance, Mr Speaker, the question was, Prime Minister, under your budget, how much will gas prices go up by? Nothing broader than that, as tight as you've requested. And, Mr Speaker, he refuses to answer a basic question.
So the question was about the Leader of the Opposition has raised his point of order. He may resume his seat. The Prime Minister, the question was about gas, and the Prime Minister is referring to gas. I'm listening carefully to his answer. And I give order on my left, and I give him the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm certainly talking about gas, which is what the question was about. Not the gas coming from those opposite,
members on my
but
left,
the gas in the system that we need. And what we used to have was that we used to have questions of the minister.
The Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Opposition will cease yelling across
He's
the
very
table.
angry, Mr Speaker.
Order. Order. The House will come to order. I'm trying to hear the Prime Minister, but the yelling on the left makes it almost impossible. The Prime Minister will be heard in silence. I give him the call.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I'm talking about gas. And we used to hear about the gas-led recovery, and why the gas-led recovery, so-called, is important in terms of price, is that was envisaging this massive increase in supply. But, of course, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. There wasn't there wasn't anything come online. As a result of this big review, and that was going to be the big recovery post the pandemic. It was going to be a gas-led recovery. And I'll give you the big tip. The government didn't change in 2020 or even in 2021. The fact is that those opposite presided over a system whereby 4 gigawatts went out and 1 gigawatt went in. And that has an impact in terms of supply. And what this government has done, unlike what happened when we came into office, we heard all sorts of rhetoric from those opposite about how the lights were going to go out, the system was going to fail, and of course that didn't happen because the Minister for Energy got together with the states and territories and delivered an outcome. And then, of course, we heard that there was going to be a shortage in gas supply. And we were told the shortage would be 56 gigajoules, petajoules. Instead of that, we delivered 157, an increase of more than 100 over what was anticipated. And we did that on the basis of the heads of agreement that was negotiated by our very fine Minister for Resources. So if those opposite want to have a debate,
Order. There is far too much noise on my left. I give a call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Assistant Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government helping protect Australians from scammers after a decade of inaction?
Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer.
I thank the member for Holt for her question and congratulate her on her election to this parliament. From Colombo in Sri Lanka to the federal parliament, hers is a magnificent migrant story, adding to the lustre of this parliament. Today I had the great honour of announcing the establishment of a national anti-scam centre, fulfilling an election commitment. It will monitor and respond in real time the pandemic of scams that is going up and up and up. We will have new codes of practice and we will bring together the capacity and the expertise across the Commonwealth, state and territory governments, regulators, but importantly telecommunications companies, banks and the finance sector, bringing together the expertise to ensure that we can track scams down and protect consumers. Our objective is to ensure that for scammers, Australia is the destination of last resort. Scams have gone through the roof. We learnt today from the ACCC $2 billion have been lost to scammers over the last 12 months, $4 billion projected over this year. The Minister for Home Affairs advises us that every 7 minutes there is an attempted data breach in this country. Average cost to business and households, $40,000. It is easy to dismiss this as something which is just preying upon the helpless and the gullible. Yes, we have a lot of work to do to protect people who have disadvantage and who are vulnerable to scams, but it is not just them. From the highest officers in the country to the farmers in the regions, all have fallen victim to scams. Crypto scams, romance scams, investment scams, invoice interception scams. This is a legacy that we have inherited. And I hear the member for Deakin, who's had a fair bit to say throughout question time, has just gone quiet. He's just gone quiet, and there's a very good reason that he's just gone quiet.
Member for Deakin.
This issue is beyond politics, but it's not beyond incompetence and it's not beyond indifference. Because on his watch, it doubled and then it doubled again. The member for Deakin had more people working on branch stacking in his office than the ACCC had working on this project. This is his legacy. This is his legacy. No wonder he is so lucky.
The Assistant
and he's
Treasurer
got
will resume
so
his
much
seat.
to...
The House will come to order. You don't have the call. You don't have the call, the Assistant Treasurer. Resume your seat. I know where the manager is going, and I'll give him the order. I give him the call. I give him the call.
This breaches a whole series of standing orders, reflection on members, offensive words. He ought to be very firmly told that this must not happen again, Mr Speaker.
I uphold order. I uphold the point of order and ask the minister to, regarding the member for Deakin, ask him to withdraw that point that he made about him, to assist the House.
Withdrawn, but this is a legacy of negligence. And it is on their head, and Australian businesses and households are paying
The minister's
for it.
time has expired. Order. Members on my left. I give the call to the honourable member for McKellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Treasurer. Over the last 3 decades, Australia's petroleum tax has collected a paltry amount of revenue from the sale of our natural resources compared with other countries. While Norway collected trillions of dollars of wealth for their citizens, Australia's petroleum tax has declined from 19% of total oil and gas sector revenue in 1992 to just 1% in 2020. What will the government do to fix Australia's broken petroleum tax system?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for McKellar for her question and for her engagement on the budget and on the PRRT in particular. It's worth the House noting, Mr Speaker, that with the member for McKellar's one question, she has asked more questions about the budget in the last 2 question times than the Shadow Treasurer has already with that one question, Mr Speaker. Now, as the member for McKellar knows, the war in Ukraine is pushing up substantially the price of gas, and that has a range of consequences, which I'll come to in a moment, but it also does have consequences for the budget. And what we've seen in the last little while is an increase in the PRRT take, but I do understand that there is a view in the community, perhaps the view that the member for McKellar shares, judging by the question, that there is an appetite for Australians to get a decent return on the resources that they own. But it is worth noting that even in the budget I handed down a couple of Tuesdays ago, the PRRT take for last year was about $1.6 billion. For this year it's expected to be about $2.6 billion. That's about $200 million more than was anticipated before the election. Next year a little bit more than was anticipated as well. And in addition to the PRRT take going up a little bit over the course of the next couple of years, the company tax take is also up, as people know, and we've got policies and plans to make multinational taxes fairer as well. But when it comes to the gas market, so we've talked about the consequences for the budget when gas prices are high, but there are obviously consequences as well for Australian industry and for Australians everywhere when gas prices are high. And that's why our priority has been, whether it's the good work of the Minister for Resources negotiating more supply, whether it's the work that we are doing together with the Minister for Industry and the Minister for Energy and others to strengthen the Code of Conduct, to make it mandatory and to introduce considerations of price into that work. This is important work. And when it comes to the PRRT, there's an element of bipartisanship in the sense that the member for Cook and then the former member for Kooyong introduced a review of the PRRT that the Treasury is yet to conclude. When they conclude, obviously I'll take their recommendations seriously. But even if we were to go down the path being proposed by a number of people around changing the PRRT, that wouldn't change some of the near-term pressures on the gas market and on the energy market more particularly as a consequence of the war in Ukraine. And so our near-term focus is on the Code of Conduct, is on price and supply. We think that's where our time is best spent without taking some of these other options off the table when it comes to the future tax arrangements.
Give the call to the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Local Government. How is the Albanese Labor government ensuring regional communities devastated by flooding have the funding they need to rebuild local infrastructure?
Give the call to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you to the member for Macquarie, who's experienced not only bushfires but floods over the last couple of years. And I know how important that engagement with your local councils in the Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury has been, and thank you for the advice that you've provided to me in my office. As a mayor of a former regional council, we experienced 9 declared natural disasters in 4 years, and the impact on communities, on businesses and on livelihoods is extensive and ongoing. Right now we're experiencing devastating floods. Over 100 local council areas across 4 states are currently declared natural disaster areas. I've been liaising with a number of mayors across the country, as well as members across this chamber, on the impacts being experienced by communities at this point in time. The cost to local councils is extraordinary, though. In my own electorate, Cooma, Adelong, Yass, Murrum Bateman and Bega have experienced flooding, as well as a number of other localities. In Adelong, residents were ordered to evacuate, cars were swept away and paddock fences were erased, just like so many other places across our regions. And in Gunning, not far from here in the member for Hume's electorate, 2 lives were sadly lost, and my sincere condolences go out to their families and to all families who have lost loved ones in these floods. The impact to our agricultural sector is immense, from damaged crops to livestock deaths to delays in getting machinery on farms to start to repair some of that damage. The government has acted quickly, though, to make disaster assistance payments available, and I want to thank Minister Watt for the timeliness in his response to this. Over 1 million disaster payments have already been made to date. Disaster recovery funding arrangements are in place with state and territory governments already, and we are providing on-ground assistance to them. In the budget, our government committed $38.3 million over 4 years to boost federal disaster response payments, in particular to the veteran-led Disaster Relief Australia, because we know we need boots on the ground when disasters hit. We're providing financial support to people in Victoria, Tasmania, New South Wales and Queensland affected by ongoing and extensive flooding, and we are investing heavily in mitigation and resilience, over $1 billion in over 5 years for mitigation and resilience projects. And we want state and territory governments to partner with us to build things like flood levies, fire breaks, investing in community resilience projects. We have to be there not only now but well into the future. Grants of up to $25,000 are available to support small businesses and primary producers impacted by October flooding with clean-up and restoration activities. This year, we invested an additional $250 million under the Local Roads and Community Infrastructure program, and there will be a particular focus on regional roads to enable those local governments to deal with their roads' impacts. Roads to Recovery continues to provide an important source of funding for our local councils. We need to be here not only for the...
Call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Order.
Can I give Mr Speaker a shout-out to Andrew, Craig, Harry and Adam, proud members of the Australian Workers' Union who I met with earlier this morning.
Order. Members on my left.
Good on you. Thanks for coming and having a chat.
I give the call to the Leader of the House.